This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien kicks off the show with his grain market update as he explains why wheat closed higher, what the other commodities are doing in the market, and what pace we are at for exports. Keeping the show rolling is K-State veterinarian Gregg Hanzlicek as he lists a few cattle health-related items that producers should keep in mind as they have summer turnout and plan for breeding. Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, concludes today's show as he says how we are in the heart of severe weather season and what Kansans can be expecting. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with a grain market update from K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien. Daniel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Shelby.
Daniel, wanting to start off with a crop today, focusing towards wheat, and what question have you been receiving around that commodity?
Well, myself and other people, particularly on the agronomic side, are concerned about the condition of wheat here in Kansas and basically the central southern plains. A lot of focus on hard red winter wheat production prospects. Yesterday on April the 23rd, May 26, wheat closed up 30 cents, up to $6.6775. July, $6.79.5, up 29.5. Other contracts went sideways to lower from that in terms of the amount of close to the high side. And we saw cash prices for wheat at the major elevators that we follow jump by about the same amount. The highest price in the state now for a cash spot price would be at $6.42 listed in both the Salina and Hutchinson area, and likely, the major terminals, the lead markets in the state for exports, et cetera. Pardon me. And that's also at Topeka as well, out to western Kansas, down southeast corner, prices $5.77 on the low side, $5.87 on the high side. So it is what it is. I should also say, in the midst of that move, we didn't see corn or soybeans move that much. Corn, the May contract closed about 2 cents higher here. Wheat's jumping 30 cents and corn up 2. In May, soybeans, May 26 soybeans, down about 4 cents to 11.60 in thinking about this question, and in our business, we get questions from the media about how come one commodity is moving and the other's not yet. I think it has to do with the seasonality of where we're at. It's quite an important time, late April heading into May, for hard red winter wheat development. We're planting corn right now, sorghum shortly thereafter, if not right now, soybeans after that. So the time for great production worries on those crops is coming. It's probably 30, 45, 60 days from now once the crops are in, and then we'll see what moisture we have or not. So got that occurring, and cash prices, as a result, not moving in a major way. The highest prices in the state yesterday on Thursday, the 23rd, actually highest cash price was in the Pittsburgh area. Again, one or two elevators standing out at $4.46, a 10-cent under basis. And following that, $4.26 in Garden City, $4.31 in Topeka, $4.02, $4.11 from Colby to Salina to Hutchinson. The best new crop bid, which is probably where a lot of people are at right now if they've moved their corn, is again in that Pittsburgh area at $4.59, Topeka at $4.44. So the eastern third of the state well represented in terms of pretty strong cash forward contract bids for corn. But here you have in the Garden City area, $4.74, highest new crop bid in the state. So just interesting. Without question, we're sitting mid $4 in a lot of areas. Again, $4.50 high side, $4.20 low side, $4.70 on the upside. And we're not really in the midst of any major production risk yet. So that's out in front of us. Sorghum prices, top sorghum prices in state, $4.11 Topeka area, $4.01 in Hutchinson. That'd be for spot markets. We do have 3 new crop bids around the state above $4. Colby, $4.09. 404 Salina, and 404 in Topeka. Interesting to watch. Would say for soybeans, the top cash price in the state, $10.95. Salina 1095, Hutchinson, Topeka 1110, 1090, Pittsburgh. So you've got some of all that occurring. Best new crop bid, again, you're at 1090 and Hutchinson, Topeka, and 1085 in Salina and Pittsburgh. So interesting days. Of course, there are all manner of things happening in the international markets. We're not talking lots about it today, but the uncertainty in the world energy markets coming over and impacting the prospects for use of ethanol on the feed grains for biodiesel on the oil seeds, and providing us with fair amount of support. Another thing that stands out to me is on the feed grain side, we have strong exports still for U.S. corn and maintenance of a pretty strong pace also for sorghum. So that's a really a positive development for those crops going forward. If we didn't have that, if we were really weak in those areas, well, we'd see even lower cash prices than we're at, all else being equal, i.e. weaker demand. I would say for even with soybeans, with wheat jumping 30 cents, it's more of a production issue seemingly, because the exports are, the wheat export numbers are just so. We did see a little bit higher wheat, all wheat export number of 19.25 million bushels here the week ending April the 16th, but we still need 25 to meet the USDA's projection. For hard red, had about 4.7 million bushels actually shipped this last week, but had come in at, we need a pace of about 8 million bushels a week to meet the USDA's projections. And then for soybeans, still surprisingly holding up decently in terms of the pace of movement for soybeans as we go forward. Had a pace of 28 million bushels for the week ending the 16th, need about 20 to meet the USDA's projection. So just all sorts of nuts and bolts there to look at the usage, underlying supply demand factors driving things. And on top of that, here we have a recorded in yesterday's media, something not on these numbers, a major purchase happening with as yet unidentified buyers. So we're using crops around the globe, and it is interesting. Here in the U.S., we don't pay as much attention to the International Grains Council numbers, but they scaled back their anticipation of production of both wheat and corn in this marketing. So, we're just so in our enthusiasm for those crops right now, but yet there's some international movement going on in a way that's indicating a little tighter stocks, still pretty strong, but we're whittling them down. And when you whittle down ending stocks, you're vulnerable to any weather scares that could come down the road. So that's really kind of where we stand right now in the grain markets.
Daniel, recently you were at the USDA data users meeting in Kansas City, and what information did you gain from there or find notable?
A lot of sensitivity, of course, on the part of the USDA, a publicly funded agency that has gathered quite a bit of feedback with regard to the numbers that they put out here of late, particularly out of the National Agricultural Statistics Service. The results that came out of the Prospective Plannings Report at the end of March were a surprise to a good number of farmers, agribusiness people, policymakers, et cetera. And in response to that, the USDA NASS says, particularly this year as they go forward on the crop side, are planning on investing resources, that people, money, et cetera, to try to increase the response rate for upcoming reports. And really the most important one right now is to follow up that prospective plannings report that happened at the end of March with a lot more successful, better coverage, better responded to acreage report at the end of June. Talked about their goal being 35% more respondents amongst U.S. farmers for that acreage report, then 10% more for the major crop reports in September, October, and then again in January. So how do you do that? Well, you send out more surveys to people, you follow up more diligently, and it just seems to me that low response rate on that last report opened the USDA up to criticism with regard to the accuracy of the numbers. And I'm not saying that they're not accurate, but the low response rates leave the door open for critics of those agencies, particularly USDA NASS. It leaves, I guess, an opening for them to exhort them, in nice polite term, to exhort them to have a better response from U.S. farmers and to end up and to avoid this issue that just happened. In fact, that the response rate for that prospective plannings report was 38%, and that's the lowest we've ever had in history. Last year, we were at 45%. So it's going the wrong direction in terms of farmer participation. And so the USDA taking that to heart, and we'll see what happens come the June acreage report.
What impact do you see that having for our Kansas farmers if that response rate does go up?
I think there would be less uncertainty about acreage and therefore production as we go forward. And of course, acreage planted, harvested is only half of the equation. The rest of it is yield. We'll still, if we get a number that's for Kansas acreage that has more public acceptance and trust in it, then that takes away one element of uncertainty and criticism and ill feeling out in the country. But we're still at the end of June. We still will have July, August, September, and October to work through in terms of the actual production numbers. So we shall see. On a side note, I'm really curious to see in the upcoming June report where some of our not just corn and soybeans come in at, but sorghum, sunflowers, canola, a lot of these other crops that are kind of drowned out in terms of attention by corn, wheat, and soybeans, but are still very, very important crops. So I'm really curious to see what, particularly the sorghum number will be. It was lower than at least I'd expected. And other market watchers expected in that end of March prospective plannings report. And I would not be surprised to see some changes in that. Hopefully, again, more accuracy, and we'll just see whether it goes up or down. Farmers will vote on that with their planners.
Daniel, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much, Shelby. I appreciate it.
That was K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show thinking of some health considerations for cattle when it comes to pasture turnout with veterinarian in K-State's Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine, Gregg Hanzlicek. Gregg, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation, Shelby.
Gregg, as we're thinking about getting everything ready for this time of year for cattle producers, first wanting to talk about bulls and what is something that should be on those producers' minds right now?
Well, we always recommend that the bulls, before they're sent out with the cows or the heifers, a veterinarian complete a breeding soundness exam to find those bulls that are less fertile than what we'd like. But it's really important that even if a breeding soundness exam is completed, that the producers at least visually watch those bulls for the next short period of time, because there are things a veterinarian cannot assess during that period. They don't know how strong their libido is. They don't know if they actually have the ability to breed heifers or cows. So they might pass the breeding soundness exam, but may have difficulties on the other end of things. So it is important for producers just to say, yeah, that bull is breeding cows and breeding heifers.
I'm thinking about the bulls right now. Important to not forget about vaccinating them as well.
Yeah, that's really important. We forget about our bulls when we talk about fly control and especially vaccinations. So this is the perfect time to be vaccinating the cow herd for reproductive diseases, and also recommend that the same vaccination program that the cows are on, the bulls should be on the same program just to help protect them. But we like the vaccine to go into the cow herd about 45 to 60 days prior to bull turnout. That gives them the maximum protection when we actually start the breeding season.
You mentioned fly control. What is one method for people to use when it comes to hopefully trying to get those under control?
Yeah, so I mean, most producers use ear tags, and they've been shown to be very, very effective against some flies, not all, but some. Research is clear that 2 tags is better than 1 in the adults. And then because we are starting to see some resistance in some of these tags as far as the insecticide resistance, it's important that the compound in the tag is rotated every year. And so a good rotation would be to use a pyrethroid this year, use another pyrethroid next year, and then the third year use an organophosphate. That rotation helps reduce the resistance that's out there. The other part of that is we're talking about pasture turnout, but when those animals come off pasture, it's really important that those tags are removed from the animals and they're disposed of properly, because we know if they're left in for long periods of time, that actually builds resistance in the flies.
What's another thing for producers to consider if they're looking into fly control, insecticide control?
Well, we've got some pass-through products, some insect growth regulators and some larvicides where it's in the mineral and it passes through the cow, and it's very effective against horn flies because that's where they lay their eggs, is in fresh manure. And some face flies do also, but it's a good product, another good way to reduce fly control. But we kind of want those products going through these animals at least 30 days prior to the fly season. And so recommend to start doing that anytime. Start putting that getting your mineral with the pass-through in there just as soon as possible.
Thinking about calves specifically first, for pasture and summer pneumonia, is that something that's been around for a long time?
It hasn't been around a long time, but it's probably the last 5 or 6 years. I kind of lose track of time, but it's something that's relatively recent. And we always talk about respiratory disease in post-wean calves. That's where we really worry about. But this is a phenomenon where calves, and it's usually either in the very early part of the pasture season or towards the middle to end of the pasture season, where these calves will actually break out with bovine respiratory disease. And I'm sure not all, but at least a lot of the cases that we deal with, this shows up in extremely well managed herds, meaning nutrition is optimum. There's nothing in the vaccination program that could be changed, and it just rears its ugly head. And I don't think we understand it very well, and we certainly don't have a good way at this point on how to control it or prevent it.
And how would producers see those calves in their pasture? What signs would they be seeing?
It's typically it's a sudden onset of a respiratory thing. Well, they'll have the snotty nose, the rapid breathing, not nursing the way they should, those kind of things. And we primarily find one or two viruses as the culprit, or we think are the culprit. And typically, at least for one of them, a very large percentage of the calves will actually become sick in a short period of time. We're talking, 70, 80, 90% of the calves will actually become respiratory. The other part of that is it's rare to have any death loss to that particular organism. We hear a lot of morbidity, which is sickness, and very low mortality, which is death as far as the summer pneumonia. You'll hear people say summer pneumonia, pasture pneumonia, pre-weaning pneumonia. It's all the same. We're talking about the same thing. We're just using different lingo.
Is there any treatment for it, or do producers just need to let it run its course?
We're pretty sure that it's viral induced. And so in bovine medicine, unfortunately, we have no antivirals. So yeah, it's just a matter of running its course, which is hard to tell a producer. You know what, your calves are gonna experience this for 7 to 10 days, even up to 2 weeks, and then it goes away. And some herds, regardless of what they do, they may see it the next year, and they may see it the next year. Some herds only experience it once, so it's a very strange phenomenon that we really don't understand very well.
Are producers able to test for this in their herd if they think they might have it?
Well, the best test for it we always want to rule out if we have a viral component for bovine respiratory disease, or do we have a bacterial component. And so what we like are called deep pharyngeal swabs. So it's a long culture swab that goes up into the nose to the back of basically the soft palate, kind of what they did with COVID. And then we test those to find out, screen for it to see what exactly the bugs or the pathogens are that are associated with the breakout.
What visual illnesses might producers also be able to see in their cattle herd?
Well, the old dreaded pink eye. Everybody hates pink eye, and we start seeing it relatively early in the pasture season when the grass grows tall and they start to seed out. Then the calves and the cows are sticking their head through that down to get the more palatable grass, and then those seed heads lacerate their corneas, and that's what starts the pink eye. And important part is that these organisms that are associated with pink eye are on the eye all the time. It takes something to break the integrity of the cornea to let them into the inner layers to cause the pink eye. So yeah, just a reminder that producers always be looking for those calves that have the excess eye drainage, keeping their eyelids shut because the sunlight's painful, those kind of things. That's probably the most dreaded thing that we have when we go to pasture.
And what issue might producers be seeing in their livestock when it comes to mobility?
Yeah, so foot rot, and that's another place that we'll see it primarily is in the pasture. The difference typically between foot rot and pink eye is that foot rot, it's usually just a couple animals, right? It's not you can have a herd outbreak of pink eye, but it's usually rare that you're going to have a lot of foot rot unless you've got really muddy conditions or something like that for the whole herd. And it's probably not that big of a deal, but the real danger is if you have a bull that has foot rot and you're in the middle of the breeding season and that bull is painful, he doesn't want to follow the cows, doesn't want to breed and those kind of things. It can put a foot rot bull can put a big whammy on reproductive efficiency for sure.
And what is one other thing that you've already seen this year when it comes to cattle herds and their health?
Yeah, so this is a really strange one. This is we typically see this issue late summer to early fall, but we did have a case of blue-green algae toxicity already this year and just a short period of time ago. And blue-green algae, it's actually a bacteria, but we have what we call blooms where they just reproduce and they produce these big blooms and the concentration is very high in these ponds. And what it requires for those blooms are plenty of sunlight, warm weather, and then light winds. And so we've had all three of those already. We've had more high winds than light winds, but in this particular pasture, in this pond, they had a huge algae bloom, and then they had some major issues. And about blue-green algae, if you wonder if you have blue-green algae in your pond, take a water sample and you can send it to us and we can identify it for you. The other thing is that if it looks like a plant or looks like moss, that's not blue-green algae. Blue-green algae looks more like coarse sand. And if you see that's causing the green in the water, then I would take a water sample and make sure that it's blue-green algae. And then there's things that we can advise to prevent the herd from actually being poisoned due to this bacterium.
Is it deadly if they are poisoned by it?
It can be. There are different toxins that some blue-green algae produce. There's one of the most common toxins actually has an effect on the liver, so we can have some liver issues. There are some basically sudden death kind of things that we do deal with, and that's what this herd had. It were cows, not calves, that actually had some sudden death due to consumption of blue-green algae.
Gregg, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thank you.
That was veterinarian in K-State's Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine, Gregg Hanzlicek. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we end our Friday show with a weather update from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, when we look at this past week, did some places in Kansas see a freeze?
Yeah, we did see much colder temperatures pushed in over the weekend. We had temperatures dropping down into the even low 20s in some of the deeper valleys of western and north central Kansas. We got down to 23, 24 degrees. Not for a significantly long time, but 3-4 hours, that's enough for wheat so far along, really statewide, with all the growing degree days we've seen and the warmth that once it's in boot stage, and it's in a lot of places it's there or exceeded it just because of the dry conditions on top of the heat, where it's maturing in much shorter stage, that it opens the potential for freeze injury when it gets that cold. And it'll take a little bit to get the total reports of what was truly hit by the freeze, and especially considering the freeze we saw last month, it's going to be hard to tally it up, and combining it with drought setbacks as well. It's going to be hard to tell what kind of damage we saw, but definitely a later season freeze. When we look at average freeze date, central Kansas, the average freeze date is this week. So we can still see freezes as we go into May, but our probability falls off pretty quickly by the first part of May, and then almost completely falls off except for the far northwest by mid-May.
As we are looking at last week, did we see any precipitation?
Yeah, we had several rounds of thunderstorm activity that really focused just in the southeastern part of the state. We have a weather station down there in Bourbon County, Uniontown, that's recorded 10 inches of rain over the last 2 weeks, and 5 of it fell this past weekend with heavy rain at times. And the gradient still remains basically that I-35 corridor there from Wichita north and east to Kansas City. West of there, just saw no precipitation for the most part and very dry conditions with these warmer than normal temperatures and breezy winds, just making the drought scenario and drought conditions worse, unfortunately.
Do you think there's going to be a turnaround for the drought conditions? Yeah,
this week drought expanded even more so. There was a little bit of improvement in far southeast, but other than that, we saw drought expansion of extreme drought along the Oklahoma border, and so we have extreme on both the Oklahoma border and the Nebraska border for only about 2% of the state. But we've got abnormally dry conditions covering about 70% of the state and moderate or worse drought conditions covering about 35% of the state. So as we move forward, we're in the heart of severe weather season. We've got a very active severe weather pattern that's going to take us through the weekend, and that means daily chances of showers and storms, especially for central and eastern Kansas. To get further west, I'm a little more skeptical on how widespread precipitation will be. I think northwest probably has the best opportunity, both Saturday night and again on Sunday night. But southwest Kansas likely to remain dry through this period. They're going to see fire weather conditions almost daily until that big cold front comes through on Sunday that pushes out all that moisture and hopefully quiets things a little bit going into the middle of next week. So some drought improvement is definitely likely, mostly in central Kansas. In eastern Kansas, you could see potential to 3 or 4 inches of rain, if not more, under some of those stronger thunderstorms. Combine that with some risk for hail, high winds, and even some tornado risk. We're definitely in the heart of severe weather season in Kansas.
In your opinion, when we look at western Kansas, are they going to be getting any precipitation?
Yeah, southwest Kansas is going to really struggle. I think missing this period of storminess going into early next week is going to be a big loss for them. The positive is we're pre-moistening, and we're letting the soils further west, basically every storm system. And as we do that, we open the door for getting that moisture a little bit further west each system. I'm hopeful by the beginning part of May, we'll get a system that can actually tap into all that moisture, pull it back, and potentially give all the high plains a good drink. And average precipitation is still on the increase. We see the first of 3 very wet months in the state, and that precipitation surplus or heaviest rainfall amounts transitions westward with it. And climatology is going to favor some precipitation eventually in western Kansas. Unfortunately, probably not going to see it in the next week.
Chip, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.